Dr. Clayton is the Whitmore Williams Professor of Psychology at the College of Wooster. She is on the board of directors of the American Psychological Association and is going to present this morning regarding her presentation titled Harnessing Psychology to Address Climate Change. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Amanda. And let me share my screen with everyone. There we go. All right. I assume someone will let me know if that's not working. I'm so happy to be with you today, and I'm sorry I couldn't be here for yesterday's part of the meeting, but it's hard to imagine an issue on which international collaboration is more important than it is on climate change. It's clearly an issue that is affecting everyone around the world, and yet it's affecting everyone around the world in different ways. So we need to have international organizations working together to really understand the impacts as well as to try and address them. And what I want to do today is to try and give a big picture of what I see as the role of psychology in addressing climate change and how psychology and psychological organizations can be useful. So to start, when I think of what psychologists can do, I start with what I was trained to do as a psychologist. And this is not where I'm going to stop. I will say more about what psychologists can do, but it is where I'm going to start. And psychologists conduct research. And I think to understand the breadth of what psychology has to offer, it's useful to think about, well, what are the main topics on which psychological research is relevant? And for me, that comes down to human perceptions, the ways in which people think about climate change, or in some cases don't think about it. Human impacts, the ways in which people are affected by climate change. And then behavioral interventions, what can be done to try and mitigate or adapt to climate change, and how can psychologists inform those behavioral interventions? So I'm going to start by giving a little background about perceptions and research on perceptions, and especially on impacts. This was a Pew Research survey, I believe, conducted this fall, certainly fairly recently, which is why certainly this year, which is why I chose it. And what it shows, I think, in a very decided way, is that people do care about environmental issues. This is something that's changed quite a lot over the past year, even certainly several years. We now have a decided majority of people who are concerned and in fact believe that climate change will harm them personally. And they even say that they're willing to make changes in how they live and work. So that's a good thing. But as we know, people's perceptions of issues, including climate change, are not always accurate. So this is where the psychological research comes into play. We need to understand what is interfering with people's abilities to accurately understand the issue and respond to it appropriately. And certainly I could give an entire long presentation on this slide, perhaps 2 presentations on this slide or more, but I won't do that. I'll just point out that as you all know, people's cognitive processes are subject to biases. For example, we tend to kind of stick with the status quo unless we're jolted out of it. We're more likely to think about things that are more cognitively available to us or salient. We tend to discount things that are in the future compared to things that are in the present. And also, of course, I think we're very aware of the emotional biases that are affecting people's understandings of climate change. Probably a prominent one is denial, that people just don't want to think about or don't want to believe something that seems to have unpleasant implications for them. So that's certainly an important part of the way a lot of people, probably including myself, think about climate change. at a slightly more nuanced level. People also are reluctant to call into question the system that they live in and that they were brought up to adhere to. So when Americans, for example, might hear that the American way of life is contributing to climate change and that they need to fundamentally change their behavior, there was a resistance to accepting that because we would like to believe we live in a good system. And in a lot of areas around the world, again, especially the United States, group identity and group kind of solidarity is really interfering with people's ability to and willingness to accept the reality of climate change. Again, in the US, it's often political identities that come into play, and people feel that to accept climate change or to accept the need to act on climate change might be to be disloyal to their group if their group stands as in opposition. Moving on beyond perceptions to think about impacts, this is what I've really been looking into recently. And I think for a lot of people, again, until fairly recently, we weren't even thinking that much about the human impacts of climate change at a global level. 10 years ago, were probably, the general public was more thinking about the impacts to polar bears, for example, or at the very least to future generations. But we're now quite aware that, that climate change has impacts on human well-being. Nevertheless, there's still I think, a lack of awareness of threats to mental health. Nevertheless, those are very serious and certainly already occurring. And again, just to briefly highlight, we know that climate change is associated with increases in extreme weather events such as floods, major storms, wildfires, heat waves, and all of these have impacts on mental health that have been studied for decades. Less obviously, the long-term changes in the climate, such as rising temperatures in particular, but also rising sea levels, melting permafrost, melting glaciers, so changing patterns of precipitation. These have the potential for impacts on mental health. Especially heat is beginning to get a lot of study. Then there are indirect impacts of climate change. So we know that climate change is likely to have a detrimental effect on food security, and lack of access to nutritional food, to sufficient nutrition, can in fact have effects on mental health. Economic impacts of climate change also, or impacts on migration, can affect mental health. And finally in this list, merely our awareness that climate change is happening, our perceptions of climate change, even when we're not, for the time being, directly affected, that can affect mental health in ways that are beginning to get a lot of interest and a lot of examination. So I want to say a little bit more about this idea that climate anxiety is a thing that people are beginning to be affected by. And this is not a clinical term, it's not a diagnosis, and there's not even agreement about the actual term. Some people say eco-anxiety or climate change anxiety. They're all more or less talking about the same thing, which is the existential threat posed by the awareness of climate change. And I put here a couple of quotes from hurricane survivors to show how our deepest perceptions can be affected by climate change. One hurricane survivor saying, "Everything is temporary," and another one saying, "I don't feel real." And I wanted to give you a little bit of data. I don't know if you can see this map very well. This was collected just this year in late May and early June. It was an amazing study. We surveyed 10,000 people, 1,000 in each of 10 countries, with asking them, and the goal was to see how young people were responding to climate change. So people aged 16 and 25, 16 to 25, and we wanted to know, what were they thinking about climate change? How worried were they, and what were they thinking about the ways in which governments were responding to it? So It was not a random sample. It's extremely difficult, of course, to do a random sample at this level, but it was not a sample of environmentalists. It was not people who were predisposed, who are on record as being concerned about climate. It was just people who had access to the internet and were willing to fill out surveys. And the survey company did their best to get a representative sample from each country. And what we found is that more than 80% of this sample of 10,000 said they were at least moderately worried. So you can see on the bottom bar here, extremely worried, very worried, and moderately worried. Hardly anybody is only a little bit worried or not worried at all. So there is a high level of worry in the general population among this age group. And 45% said their worries about climate change were having a negative impact on their daily functioning, which does suggest a psychologically significant effect. Somewhat more distressing to me and the study authors were the percentage of people who endorsed these negative statements. 84% of our respondents said people have failed. 77% said the future is frightening. And even more than half said humanity is doomed. So these are these indicate very, very strong levels of worry around the world. And I think the potential therefore for negative impacts on mental health. As a young climate activist, I was listening to said recently, how can you make good decisions about the future when you don't think there is a good future? So in addition to these impacts on anxiety, on mental health, climate change is likely to, and already is, having impacts on general well-being, just levels of happiness and positive emotions. Again, there's evidence already that heat, for example, leads to lower levels of positive emotions. There's some evidence that social interactions will be impaired. People are not as nice to each other, or they're more hostile towards outsiders when they're thinking about climate change. And at some fundamental level, our identity is going to be threatened. To the extent that your identity might be tied to a particular place, a particular location. When that location is degraded or threatened, your identity might be threatened. To the extent that your identity is tied to an occupation, many occupations are going to be disrupted or changed by climate change, so that identity can also be threatened. And again, people in places around the world where their local environments have been threatened might say, have said things like, we define ourselves as the people of the lake. How can we be the people of the lake when there is no lake anymore? Climate change, as many of you know or recognize already, increases inequity. So this is even more troubling in some ways. Inequity is a huge problem around the world. It seems to be getting worse, and it's negatively associated with well-being, among other problems. And so because some groups are going to feel the effects of climate change so much more severely than others, I think this poses a threat to our sense of a sense of ourselves as a collective humanity that can work together to address a problem. And then, as I mentioned before, there are indirect impacts on mental health from things like displacement and food insecurity. So these are the kinds of impacts that are getting more psychological research, but I think very much need more research. So what are some of the things that psychologists can do in addition to conducting research? They can work on promoting resilience. And this is another thing that psychologists are well trained to do. We work with individuals to help them be resilient in the face of all kinds of problems, and climate change can be one of those problems. I think we need to be thinking more about tools to promote individual mental health and whether new tools are needed for the kinds of distress that climate change is creating. So obviously I was talking already about anxiety, And a short-term response to help people manage their anxiety might be encouraging them to, cognitively reframe the problem, to detach from it, to engage in de-stressing. But this does not address the underlying problem. And I think that's particularly an issue when it comes to climate change, that it's hard to avoid thinking about it for a long time, even if you succeed for a short time. So if we think about helping people to deal with their responses to climate change in a more long-term way, some people, including mental health therapists, have suggested that people can be encouraged to get actively involved. I've said this myself. Of course, you want to avoid making people feel responsible for solving the problem, but getting involved can increase your sense of agency and efficacy in a useful way. However, this is sort of problem-focused coping, and to the extent that it makes you think more about the problem, it could lead to an increase in negative affect. So a third possibility, in addition to regulating your own emotions and focusing on the problem, is to focus on finding meaning. And this is something I hear, again, from a lot of young climate activists, that they find it very validating to be working on this problem. It gives a sense of efficacy, it gives a sense of purpose, and in some cases it can increase their trust, not necessarily for everyone, but for the other people they're working with. So trust in others and heightened social bonds can be another way to find meaning, and just finding some hope, which shouldn't be unrealistic hope, but some sense that positive action is possible. And just a little highlight of how that might work here. This is some data from a year and a half ago, looking at how people were thinking about climate change. And of course, anxious, angry, and powerless were strong, but also people reported feeling to some extent hopeful and inspired. So I don't think we need to think of those emotions as either impossible or as excluded. You can feel anxious and hopeful. You can feel angry and inspired. A third thing psychologists can do, and I think we need to be doing more of, is to focus on advocating for solutions, policy solutions, perhaps, solutions at a community level or solutions at a societal level. Because psychologists do have a voice, and it's I think, often respected voice. And as I said earlier, psychologists are really experts on human behavior. And although not everybody recognizes the important role of human behavior when it comes to climate change, some people think, no, it's all at the institutional or the governmental level. But individual behavioral choices matter. Individuals control not only their own behavior, but they can establish norms for other people's behavior. And of course, individual support for policy can largely determine whether or not it succeeds. So individual behavior is important. And again, as psychologists, we understand the influences on behavior occur at a variety of levels. I want to emphasize that although some people jump right to the level of individual attitudes, there are a lot of other influences on behavior, including the physical and legal environment. So that's often the first place to look. What are the regulations surrounding particular behaviors that might be more or less sustainable? What is the way in which the physical environment supports or impedes that behavior? And then psychologists were definitely used to looking at reinforcement contingencies, whether behaviors are rewarded or punished, and how those can be changed, perhaps. Social norms are some of the most important influences on behavior in a general sense, but individual attitudes and values also matter, especially if you're looking at a general pattern of behavior and not just behavior in a particular context. Some governmental agencies have begun to incorporate committees to advise them on behavioral nudges, which are just ways of essentially rethinking the environment, including the social environment and around behavior, so that you can strongly encourage behavior without actually legally regulating it, which can be more acceptable to the public. So if we think about promoting sustainable behavior in the short term, as psychologists, we can help to identify which behaviors are not only most significant in terms of their impact, but which ones are most likely to be changeable and which ones we have the tools to change. Then having identified those behaviors, we can say, what are the, sorry, there's a typo there. What are the behavioral contingencies there? What is the current social and regulatory and physical environment for those behaviors? And then do people even know what to do? Maybe they would like to do the right thing, but they don't know what it is. That's often a problem. But if we want to influence behavior in the long term, I think we need to get involved with policy, as well as encouraging people to be aware of essentially the interdependence between human well-being and environmental well-being at all levels. So a moment about, a comment about where we are now at this moment with COVID-19. So I say after COVID-19, we're not really after it, but as a global society, we've experienced what has been, I think, a very traumatic couple of years, and mental health problems have increased. Perhaps the silver lining is that societies are more aware of mental health problems and more aware of the fact that environmental changes have an impact on human health. So I think that there's more, perhaps, receptiveness to addressing mental health and to addressing the fundamental underlying conditions that might affect human health, including mental health. And in fact, although some people had originally thought maybe COVID would be a distraction from climate change and people would stop worrying about it, that hasn't been the case. And mostly, this is the same Pew Research, which was done last spring. In most countries around the world, concern about climate change has gone up. So we do see increased concern. So psychologists can promote those policy changes. I think we also need to think about engaging our colleagues and engaging other organizations. And there are a number of ways in which psychologists are beginning to get involved. And I just picked out a few almost randomly that I happen to know about or have been involved with. Obviously, it's, I think, very important for psychologists to be involved with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And I'm delighted that there are more psychologists involved with the current assessment report, the sixth assessment report, than has ever been the case in previous assessment reports. And they're putting a greater emphasis on mental health. There are groups such as the Climate Psychology Alliance, which tries to bring together clinicians who are concerned about climate change. Just a couple of academic centers, the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication involves psychologists, and it's been very influential in their reporting on how Americans in particular understand climate change and in using those messages to try and affect political change. In the UK, the Center for Climate Change and Social Transformations has been working on a lot of research in this area. So psychologists can work with the media because public opinion matters, and you can get messages out that way. They can work with elected officials in the US, for example, through congressional briefings or just calling your elected representative. And they can provide informational resources that are available just online, for example. So here are a few, again, more or less randomly chosen examples. The New Zealand Psychological Society, I don't know if Brian Dixon is here today, but they've been talking about climate change. The British Psychological Society, the American Psychological Association. And these are more or less articles, but some organizations have produced essentially resources. So how can we provide information that might help communities be resilient in the face of climate change, from the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues. And Columbia Center for Research on Environmental Decisions produced this a few years back, this very useful guide to the psychology of climate change communication that I think has been used a lot. So those are some current examples. And finally, this is kind of a closing comment. I think we can and should be thinking and are thinking about transforming the profession itself. What else should we be doing? And as some of you know, this is the American Psychological Association's mission. I bring it up to remind us of how important climate change is to our core mission. And the APA is currently engaged on, they have a task force that is set up to consider how psychology can build upon and expand and solidify its role in addressing climate change, including at an internal level by transforming its own practices. So I'll just close by saying, again, here's the list of what psychologists can do. We should also try to be role models, and we need to be very careful to sustain ourselves in response to the kinds of stresses that we're all facing. To allow ourselves to continue to be effective in working on these issues, we need to attend to our own mental health. So thank you for listening, and I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was incredibly informative. And I see Dr. Sandy Schulman, who is, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped there. It should be Dr. Joanne Hans, who represents the Middle Eastern Psychological Association in the GPA, Dr. Lysiane Basaro, who represents the Brazilian Society of Psychology, and Dr. Carlos Salaquet, who represents the Inter-American Society of Psychology. Welcome. If it's working, Carlos, please turn your camera on.
You have me without camera, so
okay.
I can open it. Please help me.
Okay, we'll see. Someone I'm sure will reach out to you. And Susan, feel free to stay on. I actually wanted to there you are. Good morning. I wanted to start. I'll ask Joanne and then Lysiane and Carlos. You know, I look at the data that Susan presents, and I imagine all of us say exactly. We agree. There are so many ways in which we can be working on the climate crisis as psychologists, but we're so rarely in the conversation. Can you help me kind of bring these two opposed experiences together? We have a lot to offer, and where are we? Joanne?
Sure. Actually, I'm representing some few countries from the Middle East, and I think this is a very, very interesting topic for our countries, because it is a unspoken, I would say, topic. It has always been recognized as more of a Western thing, and that we don't suffer from things like that in the Middle East. But lately, we have seen an increase, a very amazing increase of rising temperatures and the heat level that is causing tremendous impact on not only certain areas, but in most of the region, in most of the countries in the Middle East. We have now on monthly basis very high levels of fires happening that are destroying the agriculture component of the countries. And so with this, I was listening to Dr. Susan, and it's really impressing how the raise, all these high levels of the temperature are damaging nutritional factors and increasing medical conditions. So from my perspective, and she mentioned also the impact of this pandemic, the COVID-19, to us, unfortunately, is a worldwide crisis. But I would say in the Middle East, it has created higher levels of education when it comes to mental health. Psychologists were seen before as something, psychology in general, as more as a taboo, very high stigma attached to it. So in order for the population and the community to listen to us, it was quite difficult. So now I see it as, and actually as the president of the Middle East Psychological Association, what we want to do even in our next conference is raise awareness on this, educating people. So one of our goals is to start the education process on the impact, and not only the impact, but the connection between mental health and climate change. There's a lot of people that don't understand. They're like, why psychologists are talking about climate change? What do you have to do with this, right? So I think one of our biggest goal is to create those levels of education. We are in a collectivistic culture. And as that, educating them and seeing the impact that it has on their mental health. Dr. Susan talk about anxiety levels. Anxiety is the number one mental health problem in the Middle East right now. And I can see the association of all of this. You know, there's a lot of trauma that happened from previous war conditions, you know, invasions and wars and stuff like that. And so then all of this is impacting the mental health, and having that connection done will be very beneficial for the community.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, those are great points and wonderfully placed in your particular context. Lucian?
Oh, hi. Thanks to be here. I like very much the Susan had said, and I think one of the issues I would raise is like, what is the image that psychology has in each country? And in Brazil, we have a large contingent of psychologists, and they are, we have a good level of research, even on environmental research. But then how is the voice of psychology in society, and what people think psychology does and what people think psychology studies? So if people see psychologists as clinical psychologists only, that's the model they have. So there is no connection with the environment and climate change whatsoever. So we must communicate among ourselves about that issue. And perhaps we should be aware that we have cognitive and emotional bias ourselves about the climate. And we suffer from climate anxiety, not managing to resolve, you know, to solve this anxiety in an action way, you know, in a proactive way as psychologists. So if we enhance perhaps first the awareness among us, among psychologists, as we are doing in this meeting, on how can we be engaged in this more than denying or using our cognitive and emotional bias to avoid the problem, because we have to face it as an everyday challenge in professional and also personal way. And I think this is the issue about the children and the young children, about the anxiety. How can it be solved? So education increases anxiety, but we have to give action opportunities for people to act on their anxiety and then solve this uncomfortable feeling about the climate change. I will share a small talk about my infancy. When I was 9 years old, I wrote about pollution. That was the word at that time. And we were, I mean, from a generation, as many of us here, afraid of the nuclear doom, you know, that we would all die and live in an awful world with climate change produced by nuclear weapons. And then we have like acid rain and all this stuff that happens every day now. That was predicted to be caused by nuclear weapons and not by human beings. So guess what? Human beings did that. And as a child, I was very anxious about how would be the future with all this level of pollution. So now I know how it is, you know, but at that time, what would be my my possibility to act upon that? So the opportunities to speak about that and realize that we have, for instance, a spatial optimism that is environmental psychology shows us, that we believe that where we live is much better than everywhere, somewhere else where there is, you know, let's say, oh, thanks God, this is not this place or that place that I have this problem or that problem, fires or environmental accidents. And then we kind of are relieved that we live in a safe place. And also the temporal bias that we believe that in the future, everything is gonna be the same, you know, or is gonna be worse. So if people are aware of this psychological understanding and how can we deal with this information, I think even psychologists will get surprised that themselves they can act differently as citizens. So I think that's my considerations based on Susan's appointment. Very, very good, very important meeting indeed.
Thank you so much, Lucian. Carlos.
Thank you. Well, first, what a pleasure to be in your presence. Thank you, Amanda and the team, for the conference and for inviting me to participate. Thank you, of course, to all my GPA colleagues who I think will be rejoicing on all these presentations because it tells us we are on the right path. And in addition to that, it's fantastic to hear Dr. Clayton. I don't know if you can sense the emotion in my voice because I admire your work and you did a masterful presentation, but it was so humble. I didn't hear you talk about the quote unquote instrument. You developed the climate change anxiety scale, the environmental identity scale, and you had been on this path for so many years, which bring me to the main point. What you summarize represents a path. I've seen, no offense intended, other colleagues doing similar work. In fact, I just found Dr. Urbina in Mexico, who is working with the Mexican government since 2006 to develop guidelines and ways to engage people in the protection of the environment, etc. And I work in a presidential initiative that I started in the Society of Inter-American, la Sociedad Interamericana de Psicología, the International Society of Psychology, during my presidential stint, because I wanted to bring some of the knowledge, what is happening in the Americas. And it turns out to be that is happening a lot. Different names, environmental psychology, ecological psychology, but also, as Dr. Clayton mentioned in her papers, social psychology, anthropological psychology, meaning we had been at it. What about what John Charles Torres Vasquez, you know, and also Raul Ortega mentioned in the chat? You know, is it okay? Well, what about disaster? What about what the different organizations are doing? So from my point of view, this type of conferences, this type of group represent, and I hope my colleagues understand my initiative as a president of SIP, represent ways to bring a hub. All these efforts have been disseminated. But what do I get from my climate change concerned colleagues? Number one, we are the lone ranger. I'm sorry that it's a male, but it's to convey the idea that it's a lonely enterprise so far. You know, it's a disjointed effort. We are not coalescing. We are not coming together. That's the reason why this conference is so important, for example. And that's exactly what Dr. Clayton was trying to say, is that we need to advocate. Yes, not only for climate change protections and all that, but also for the role of psychology into this. So in my humble effort, and I have to share with you, we went for 4 members on this presidential initiative to 11 2 Fridays ago, and we are now capturing a larger audience. The number one concerns loneliness, the non-articulate efforts, no concern for psychologist presence. Today we know most of the climate change is human-made. Therefore, it's a behavior that can be changed. Who are the experts on behavior? And Dr. Clayton gave us exactly a finite number of very good ways to move forward. So from my perspective, we need to come together, develop awareness, where we are, what are we doing, across the board, as many participants as possible on our discipline. Knowledge, what are the pieces of information that are maximally relevant today to effect change? Skills, what are the skills we can use? And finally, action. How do we move forward to influence not only individual groups, societies, but also legislature? And finally, I would like to add, and ways to protect ourselves. In fact, Dr. Clayton have a paper on how eco pioneers, how promoters of climate protection get impacted by the fact that we are getting into a very critical time, and it's a very disheartening. But she mentioned collaboration, participation, etc. Action, as one of our colleagues mentioned yesterday, promotes hope. And I have the highest hope that this type of event will help us bring all this together. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. That's it. You all already inspired. On that note, because Joanne mentioned she represents several countries in the Mideast, in her role in her association. Lisian is from Brazil, and Carlos has your leadership role is the Americas, Canada to Argentina. So we have just about 1 minute for each of you. But again, starting with Joanne, Lisian, Carlos, what thoughts do you have? I mean, Dr. Clayton presented all kinds of ways in which psychology has a role addressing climate, but what is specific to your cultural context, you think, in getting started? Joanne?
Sure. Actually, this is the first stage. The first step for us was to engage with other colleagues. I think that the word of one association and perhaps maybe one representative will not do it. The Middle East is, it can be large. We don't cover all the countries, but engaging with our colleagues, making sure that we have the support of other international institutions or associations. So it looks as if we're not alone, we're coming heavy, we're coming strong, and having perhaps the perk of the Western, which is highly on research, something that the Middle East lacks. So use that scientific support from the international associations to implement it and to impact the community in the Middle East. That will be number one tool that we will be perhaps stage that we will be taking.
Wonderful. Thank you. Lucian?
To answer that, I will take the phrase of the women from indigenous people in Brazil. They said we should heal the earth. And I think this matches the image that psychology has as a profession that helps people. So perhaps we could help people to heal the earth as, saying sorry, we did wrong, and try to, ameliorate, mitigate the impact that we have on this planet. So I think this is a good start, and I think it resonates a lot in my country. But I'm not sure if it's gonna be the, let's say, the political, economical point of view. But I think this is a good way to start in an optimistic way, raising hopes, as Carlos said.
I know you're going to ask me because I'm the only one to ask, but you were muted, so I'm trying to help. Anyway, it happens to all of us. Basically, I love what my colleague said. Those are the things we need to bring to the table. Let's remember the Beatles and go with Come Together.
I love it. And I mean, certainly one wonderful thing about the Alliance is that approach that we're a global community and we can support each other in our specific community context. So that sort of broad umbrella and our own cultural context. So if Dr. Clayton could join us, we're going to go ahead and move to the questions that some of the participants have sent in. Hi there. One is how do you suggest kind of making that initial impact at a community level, getting past barriers to, I just even things recently read how people, even where they believe climate changes is caused by human behavior, really don't want to give up warm water for a shower or buying, you know, new clothes every year, whatever it is they do. And then this question in particular, how can you address climate and look towards solutions in places where there's extremely limited financing? Where last night, actually, the president of the Haitian Psychological Association mentioned, you know, there's some practical challenges. People cut down trees in Haiti because they need firewood. And so when we're talking about achieving balance, you know, how do you do that? The nature and the human need. Why don't we start with Susan and then we'll go in reverse order. Carlos, Lucia, and Joanne.
Yeah, I mean, of course, these are big questions or big challenges, and there's no easy answer. You know, how can we fix everything? I think the last thing you said, Amanda, was really important, which is we don't want to blame people for not taking action because there can be really good reasons. I mean, people have other worries that they might have to prioritize, like their family's health and survival, their economic, you know, continued existence. This is going to depend on the community and what that community is structured like, but I am a big believer in trying to harness social groups somehow, and there might be existing social groups. In some cases, it could be even perhaps working with the local schools, because one advantage of that is they, you know, reach such a large portion of the population. One disadvantage is that they can be very highly regulated and hard to kind of insinuate yourself into, but sometimes it would work. There might be community groups that exist that could set up a you know, a discussion group among citizens to just talk about how is climate change affecting the community. And I think by starting with the concerns that everybody has and not necessarily starting with mental health, for example, because as some people have pointed out, there can be stigma about talking about mental health impacts, but you could just say, well, how have we all been seeing the effects of climate change? You know, what are the challenges? I think mental health impacts would probably come up, and just the opportunity to share those experiences with other people and maybe as a group brainstorm possible ways of addressing them could be, you know, a really grassroots first step to beginning to address these issues.
Thanks so much, Carlos.
What a great way to move forward. In fact, when I look at your study and a couple more, youngsters are the hope of the future. They even show up at COP26 to protest, requiring more action. So when you look at the study you did, the youngsters are very concerned. They feel they have been let down. They want more action. And if we go to the schools, if we go to the grassroots movements, and we capture their experiences and transform that into inspiration for moving forward, that would be fantastic. The concept of eco-anxiety comes to me, the concept of solastalgia, which is the nostalgia for places known, comes to my mind, and those can be inserted in the K through 12 curriculum and beyond, in colleges and universities also, to help them and then to give them path for action. How do you transform that into specific requests, local, citywide, state and country, and global? Why not? We have youngsters leading global movements. Thank you.
Lucian.
I think also we have to talk to other disciplines and with other professionals, because the changes in the world due to technology and the kind of exploitation, not just of the natural resources, but also people, can lead to hopelessness regarding the climate change. People will get too busy with themselves and solving their own problem, as Susan said, that it's going to be difficult to focus on like a societal and major change that lead to really decreasing the impact on the environment. I'm very much concerned about the message that leads to helplessness point of view, that is something like, oh, there is nothing we can do, so just live the life as it is today forever, you know. So this is what we must avoid, and it's not clear for other disciplines that psychology has this possibility to open the view of the human factors in when you build a building, when you plan a city, when you talk about traffic, and when you talk about the communities that will be displaced, when you talk about immigration. That is not, we shouldn't be only guided by our own perceptions as human beings, but as a professional on talking to others regarding the science that we are into. So,
Joanne?
I agree, and I think that coming from this region, I think one of our priority right now will be to start implementing the talk. You know, start talking about this not only at high levels of professionals, but from very lower levels. In schools, educating our kids. You know, we need to start educating the kids on how much water they can use. My kids, I have boys, and they love going fishing, and we had to, you know, they're excited because they got a fish this little big, you know, and so we have to tell them you have to put it back. You know, it's about giving back and making sure that that fish grows, so we can, you know, have more fish around. So I think the education is my biggest point, and that the fact that it should start not only at the higher levels, but from very early ages.
And the last 2 minutes, and thank you, those are all wonderful contributions. Now, there are a couple of questions about how to develop leaders. And I'm curious if any of you know, of course, the Alliance is working on that, but about ways in which we can bring psychologists, young psychologists, into leadership roles to address climate change.
I would mention something. I think that this is the opportunity for the young psychologists to start doing research and perhaps intern. I had an intern at our clinic, and I encouraged her to actually she had to do a second internship, and I told her, you should do it somewhere else other than in a center or clinical. You know, go into something that is more governmental or something more either embassy or, you know, and so they can expand the fact that psychologists are not only in a little small place, you know, that there's a lot more of psychology out there in the world. So I would say that's how young psychologists can start, and that way they can do research and journals and articles and spread that knowledge around.
That's yeah, that's a great point. It even makes me think about interdisciplinary opportunities for psychologists to move. You know, at COP26, there were quite a few people representing, you know, the Global Architecture Association. Interestingly, into another question that someone has in the chat, they were saying, well, the architects that they're working with, for example, to address climate themselves as a group are experiencing significant levels of, you know, depression, anxiety, because their work days are all about addressing this issue. They go home at night and their kids ask them, well, you know, we saw March as a cop or that kind of thing. Are things changing? And that they keep having to emphasize very small steps. But certainly it'd be good for psychology to think broadly in that aspect. And with that, I would like to thank you all very sincerely. I wish you could hear the applause. You know, I feel like Zoom needs to add a loud applause app or something, because it was really a brilliant start to the day, right? There you go, the hearts. So thank you so much. We have a 10-minute break, and then we will all be back and have an opportunity to learn from our Ukrainian psychologist colleagues who are actually working specifically on developing educational tools about climate change. So see you in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome back. Kirsty. Okay. Not sure if I should be seeing a video, but I got the go. So welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a restful 10-minute break. I am delighted to introduce you to our colleagues from the Ukrainian Psychological Association, in particular, Dr. Valeria Pali, who is their president and represents Ukraine on the Global Psychology Alliance. She is going to speak to us about how psychology associations can educate on climate change and share the Ukrainian experience in particular. Welcome, Valeria.
Good morning, good evening, and even good night. And now I try to share my screen. I hope you can see it. Do you see it?
Yes, we see it.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, it's a big pleasure for me to be with you today and tell you about climate and pro-environmental education. In 2 days, we have been speaking about our professional contribution to the combating climate crisis. And I want to join our conversation and tell you about how psychologists can educate the professional community and general population based on our experience. But firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Valeria Pali. I'm the president of the National Psychological Association of Ukraine and the head of the climate group in my association. Our climate working group was created in 2019 after the Lisbon summit. Ukraine is not a part of the European Union, and due to political reasons, the climate issue isn't widespread in communication on different levels. Many Ukrainians, as citizens of developing countries, acknowledge climate change, but do nothing. While preparing for the summit, I realized that our specialists do not understand the relevance of psychology to the climate change topic. Ukrainian current agenda is focused on the war, which has been for 7 years our reality, as well as political instability and different social and economic challenges. I went to the summit with a lack of understanding of how psychologists can help solve climate problem too, but I came back with a clear understanding of what we can do today. Powerful collaboration with other countries gave me support and insights. 3 days in the company of specialists made me determined to act. Sure, my colleagues and me had concerns about how the topic would be perceived by Ukrainian community and Ukrainian psychologists, but we dared to act. In 2019, the National Psychological Association of Ukraine was small, young, but very ambitious. We didn't have a special budget for climate activity, so we decided to choose psychologists as our target audience. Honestly, it was the easiest way because we had access to the community and a good reputation among colleagues. The main idea of our campaign was psychologists are agents of change, because they know more about behavior changes, and since every day they get in touch with a large number of people who appreciate their opinion. And we decided if we educate our colleagues, they can share the awareness and can make their contribution. And we were focused on two problems. We have been raising awareness about climate change impact on mental health and developing behavior changes strategies. In addition, we adapted these messages to general population too. Then we gathered a group of proactive and eco-aware volunteers, our psychologists, and started to act. Evaluation of the problem understanding was our first step. So we conducted a small focus group on how the topic of climate change is perceived by the community. The majority of participants considered it boring and completely distant from the topic of mental health. Almost all our colleagues showed a feeling of complete powerlessness in resolving this issue. This is why our activity focused on building association between climate, mental health, and psychological science. This summer, we conducted a small research about beliefs, attitudes toward climate change, behavioral patterns, and the barriers of pro-environmental behavior among psychologists, medical and social workers, and teachers in Ukraine. And the results showed us three types of colleagues, and it helped us to understand our audience much better. The first group was deniers. Fortunately, it's a small percent of Ukrainian psychologists. Climate change denial is not a popular topic in Ukraine at all, so I think that we are very lucky with it. The second group is psychologists with high level of ecological responsibility. And there are people who know and do a lot. And this group of people help us to promote our ideas. For instance, they share our posts in social media, take part in our activities, and tell other people about us and about psychological science and climate change. And the majority and the third group are colleagues who are concerned about climate issue, but feel powerlessness and don't have idea about their contribution. In fact, we have been working with the last group because they are interested in the topic of climate change. They don't have enough knowledge about it, and they need more information and tools. How did we start? In 2020, we launched an informational campaign and collaborated with several local ecological initiatives and media resources in order to communicate the connections between environmental problems and mental health. As a result, we wrote articles for different magazines for a wide audience and for psychologists as well, took part in different conferences and public events, conducted lectures, and even organized a flash mob. Our association proposed special posters for those who want to share their eco-friendly values and lifestyle. Everyone could download and print it for our website, personalize it, and display it for visitors and colleagues. Many colleagues made different eco-changes at their workplaces, took a photo, and they made a post on social media. All our initiatives like that were very popular because people could join the movement and make their contribution. And I think that it gives them a feeling of community. We also created different materials we formed a toolkit for psychologists for creating eco-friendly offices, centers, and conference halls. This document contains a clear explanation about the problem, tips, and ideas for specialists on how to make their workplaces more eco-friendly. In this document, we pay attention to the action plan, and all our suggestions are realistic and absolutely doable. This toolkit is suitable for general population too. Also, we prepared a guideline for fostering eco-values and forming an eco-friendly environmental mindset for psychologists. This document contains evidence-based advice for psychologists who work in different professional fields, such as organizational psychology, clinical psychology, or educational psychology. We also have been working on a series of short animations for a wide audience about different aspects of the environmental crisis and its influence on mental health. But last year, we realized that these activities are not enough. And the members from our working group took part at the Psi Solution competition organized by the APA with the idea to create online training course for psychologists, teachers, and medical workers about climate change and mental health. And our team won the People's Choice Award. And with the support from the APA's Office of International Affairs, our team implemented the idea. And I have a strong desire to tell you about our course a bit more. In our course, we wanted to give general information for specialists about the problem and clear evidence for people from Eastern Europe. We want to share scientific knowledge about climate change consequences on mental health, show different treatment approaches which use nature, such as walk and talk therapy or plant therapy, and tell our participants about barriers of pro-environmental behavior, behavior changes, effective communicative strategies, narratives, metaphors. And the key messages of our course are: you and your inner circle affect the climate change. Climate change affects mental health. You as a psychologist can prevent the problem. You can help people who suffer climate consequences. Nature is a resource for your work, just care about it. Correct messages and strategies can change human behavior. In total, we prepared 9 short lectures which give answers to different questions. And you can see these questions on this slide. The duration of the course with the passing the test is 2 hours, 30 minutes. Every lecture is from 7 till 20 minutes. And we wanted to make our course not so long, very dynamic and very useful for our participants. For last 10 months, we had been working on content, visualization, filming, editing, promotion, and promotion of our course. The course is available for free It's hosted on an online platform. Every participant can fill the registration form and get access. We provide small revision tests after every lecture. After completing the course, participant will pass the final test and get a certificate. When we were developing the course, we wanted to add some symbolism, and we created a special logo for our course. This is a mascot, and the mascot, our mascot, combines the elements of the brain, tree, and cloud, and it refers to nature and mental health. Besides, our mascot has a variety of moods, and we use it in our communication. For example, with the mascot, different emotions, we strengthened our messages in our presentations and in all our materials. At the end of September, we filmed our lecture. We rented good cameras, light, used different backgrounds. The camera captured our lectures from different sides. It was very important for us because we wanted to make our course attractive for participants and not boring. So I think we have achieved our goals, and now I'm showing you the screenshot from the video, and you can see different lectures, different backgrounds, and colorful presentations. The course was launched in Ukraine 2 days ago. During the first days, we have been getting many responses and good feedback. It's a newborn, and we are happy parents. The next time we'll be translate our course into English, and I hope that the English version will be ready by the end of January, because we are going to share our course with other countries and with other national associations, and especially with colleagues from Eastern Europe. And I think that our colleagues can change something. Maybe they want to add something or remove something. It will be up to them. To summarize, I want to say that we are in the very beginning of our path, and but our experience shows that the topic of climate change can be really interesting and important for psychologists if we can offer contemporary evidence-based knowledge and real tools for changing behavior and sharing awareness of a problem. Sure, the cultural, economical, national backgrounds are really important and significant. For example, in our case, the small number of climate deniers plays a big role in our success. But I think that our good results lie in understanding the needs of our audience, the activity of campaign, and the variety and availability of the materials. We offer our community different opportunities to join global movement, global climate movement, and make their personal contribution. And I think that it's very important for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valeria, and to you and all your colleagues for your brilliant like creativity and innovation and advancing education in climate change. It certainly comes up often. We have with us as our panel, Dr. Miroslav Svetlak, who represents the Czech Psychology Network for Global Changes. Feel free to join us. We are also welcoming Dr. Michael Esnoa, who represents the Nigerian Psychological Association, and Dr. Usha Kiran Suba, who represents the Nepalese Psychological Association. So Miroslav, we'll start with you, then continue with Michael and Usha. Just briefly, I'm curious, since policy has come up as a question in many of the questions that we're seeing, and thank you for those. We're getting to them as best we can in the time we have allotted. But policy is frequently part of what we talk about doing in terms of psychological science. I'm curious about educational policy here. So how do you think psychologists might advocate within their own community, national context, or even more globally, to have something like the program that the Ukrainian Psychological Association is developing required in as part of the early childhood through secondary school training that children get across the world. So Miroslav?
Greetings from the Czech Republic, and thank you to be here today, and it's a great honor for me. Thank you, Valeria, for your presentation, and I would like to firstly mention that it's great, and thank you for your work. And your research shows that the population of people is heterogeneous from the point of the readiness for the change. So that's why we need some specialized campaigns for different parts of people. So thank you, and you documented it. And now your question, Amanda. We have many informations in textbooks for our children from the first grade and along their life. But what I can observe as a clinical psychologist, which is working with children, is that this information is dissociated from a real life. So I think that children learn about ecology and our environment and and about impact of human on the nature. But I think that they don't really realize what does it really mean. They just learn it for the tests. They know everything about climate change, but they don't realize that it's a real problem, that it's a impact to our environmental field. So I think that our teachers are not very trained and educated to bridge this dissociation, to help children to realize that it's a real challenge, a real problem.
It's a great point. We probably need to train our teachers while we're training our students. Thank you.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Michael?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think he has made a point. I will only add, apart from training the teachers, but also emphasizing in that training the use of life examples, because children like to learn more from what they see. And so in doing that, some form of link should be created between, because behavior, they say, is a factor of its consequence. So when children use or see life examples or simulations where direct effect as much as possible can be demonstrated to show how they can impact the environment, then it may help to drive the point. Let me give a little example. In the community, one of our communities here in the country, they recently recorded high incidence of some diseases, and then some people try to trace about this. And in fact, even though the evidence is still very primary or elementary, They are trying to suspect some human activities like young children who go and burn bushes for one thing or the other, taking the activities of those children with the importance to create a link between causes and then how this can affect the environment. Thank you for now.
Thank you, Michael. I'm looking, Usha?
Yes, namaste. Yeah, first of all, I would like to congratulate Pali for her magnificent project and her presentation, which speaks about the climate change that disrupts the physical health as well as the mental health of Ukrainian. I appreciate the work that has been done to resolve it throughout the years. I have some questions about her adopted strategy and guidelines to work out and impart the education about the climate change and community intervention. She talks about much about the community interventions. It is very good and works out. But compared to my country education system, environment and health have been already been there since 1980s in school and introduced environment science in the university since 1995. But these knowledge are never implemented and correlated practically or never absorbed in behavior level. Then I have a question, how do we proceed according to her interventions and guidelines? I think awareness without action is worthless. It is my questions to Pali.
So, Valeria?
Sorry, Usha, I had a very bad connection and may I ask you to repeat your question? Sorry.
Yes, yeah, I heard your presentation and I very much appreciated your work and how do you work out in your country, Ukraine, and it gives a glimpse of the climate change disrupts the physical health and as well as the mental health of Ukrainian. But I do have some questions about your adoptive strategy and guidelines to work out and impart educations about climate change and community intervention you have used there. It is very good. It works out in your country, but compared to my country's education system, environment and health have already been since 80s in school and introduced environmental science in the universities since 1995. But these knowledge are never implemented and correlated practically or never observed in the behavior level. Then my question is, how do we proceed? Because you already meant many intervention and guidelines. And I think from my end, awareness without action is worthless. What do you think? And what is your suggestions to me also? Because you have done a very magnificent project.
Thank you, Usha. It's a bit tricky question because I think that we have completely different situations in our country, and our target audience was psychologists and adults, and it's people were born in other country, in the Soviet Union, and the level of education and some educational values were completely different. And we try to take it into account in our project, and we try to include all our cultural and educational specificities. And I think that I don't have any ready suggestions or recommendations for you, because I think that I need to learn more your educational specificities. But I think that the good idea for you to conduct a small research or maybe small focus group with your target audience and evaluate their expectations, their needs, their ideas about it. Maybe it will be helpful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Val.
Thanks, Susha. Thanks, Valeria. Just to kind of move that idea forward a little bit, I'm curious if Michael or Miroslav would like to add to that. How the question being, and we talked about this a little bit in the opening, is that climate change is a global problem that we are all experiencing very perhaps shared and unique aspects of that. How can we develop kind of a global education that is, I guess, simultaneously local? Miroslav, do you have thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, do I have the floor?
I'm sorry, Miroslav, and then you continue, Michael. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, maybe it will be sound strange, but I think that what we really need is a wisdom. We need to resuscitate our connection with the basic rules of life. It means that we are the part of our environmental field. And I think that it's very easy and very basic. And this is the wisdom which we can communicate around the world, because everybody is able to be aware that I need a water, I need air, I need eat something. And I think that this is the first step. And I think that this is universal rule, and our campaign should be based on this, because we have so many informations and we are confused and we don't understand to them, and we don't expertise to understand what does it mean. I mean, information from climatologists and from biologists, we don't know it, but everybody knows that we need to breathe and we need to eat and we need to be in connection with close people. So I think that campaigns should start here, and we just need to find, approach which shouldn't be so ordinary, because in the scientific world, so many people could say, oh, it's just a wisdom, and why are you talking about this? It is so easy. It is something from Tibet, or what do you think? But we should find some approaches. I mean, how to explain wisdom in a scientific words. I think so. This is my opinion.
It's a really good point. Kind of the shared fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Michael?
Yeah, I think it's possible. What we need to do, which I think we have started, is to create the global awareness, first with psychologists, on what we can do to bring about the needed change, and then to act locally, because we are different in terms of physical locations, and each environment presents unique challenges. In some well-industrialized countries, it could be industrial affluence. In some not well-industrialized countries, it could be cutting of trees. because of economic reasons or to cook. In middle stage countries, it could be managing physical pollution, polythene, industrial affluence, and so on and so forth. So I think the idea is to create the global awareness, not just among psychologists, but also across disciplines, policymakers, government actors, the communities, and then to act locally to achieve the global objective. I give an example also with what happened some weeks ago in the country. Young people, it's been a report of young people getting involved in abuse of tramadol, opioids generally, but particularly tramadol. And recently, many communities, town unions, their leaders now aggregate, sensitize everybody, and then make a movement. Say, we don't want this in our community. People who are dealers, people who are users need to move to be treated. Those who are dealers, they need to give, they want to give them money to do other businesses. It was a community approach, and people find it somewhat active or effective. So different approaches.
We may have lost Michael.
I lost on a connection.
Okay. Well, he comes back to us. I'm trying to summarize questions in the chat, and I'm curious, what would be a recommended first step? Like if you went out and were thinking about psychologists' roles in educating, children, policymakers, the world, what would today, tomorrow, what should we do? It's open to all of you.
Yes, Amanda. Yeah.
Go ahead, Usha.
I admit your advice, like for the policy making. Yeah, government, the politics is the power. It changes everything in the country or the nations. But those policy, we make a policy. But if it is not implemented or understood by or taken by our communities well, then it is not used, I think so, because I think that everything should be applicable. People understand it and apply it. Then only we can preserve our environment. We need our guidelines. Okay, the guidelines we can take from the other global guidelines, or our Nepal government has already ruled out some things. You have to do this one and that one, but still I don't find it works out properly. It is closed in the policy, a book, but it never implemented. That's why I think we should, because you are the education. That's why I think we should change the education system, how to impart knowledge, and as soon as given the theoretical knowledge, it should be applicable. Otherwise, we need a lot of hands, the helping hands, to promote and to control the climate change.
So really getting out there and advocating for policy change. Thank you, Usha. Valeria, Michael, Miroslav?
Yeah, it would be great to know some universal approach, but I think that we should learn people not to be so fast. I mean, when we hear some information from radio, on television, or we read it on internet, we should be able to calm down and just decrease our speed for a moment, and to be able to stay in contact with our feelings and with the real meaning of the information. So I think that the new way or new approaches of campaigns could focus on the process, I mean, how we process the information. We should learn people to be able to hear properly, to not to make their attitude so fast, just to stay and say, okay, I hear another information about climate change. What does it really mean? I needn't to understand to everything. I needn't to believe to politicians, but they say something what is very important about my environment. So it doesn't matter what is it, but it is probably the truth. So what is the part which I can take, and what is the part which is just the motivation of politicians? So I think that we should teach people to be able to process information from media, social media, and so on. And I'm missing this kind of campaigns. I think that we focus only on awareness increasing, but we have enough information right now. It's enough. I would expect that we are going to be able to create campaigns which are able to change how people think about informations. So this is my opinion for this moment.
Yes.
Very well taken. I'm sorry. Were you going, Valeria?
Can I add something, Amanda?
Sure, go ahead, Usha.
I think I want to give a message, what is inside me, and I would like to speak here. Like our oxygen will be limited as the deforestation continues, no? Our air will be dirty due to the pollutions, and most importantly, our future family will be harder and shorter lives. If we don't take an immediate action against the climate change, our future will be dark. That's why the education play a great vital role here. And we don't have another planet to migrate to live in. So we have to survive here. For that, as we parents, because not school, college, these are the secondary home for the students or the pupil. For that, as we parents and teachers teach our children, which are not taught to us when we are young. But it is necessary to bring a drastic change, teaching them and working in the climate change to preserve the eco-friendly environment and change the lifestyle. That's why
those are great points, Usha. and they combine very nicely, I think, with the point that I think Miroslav was making about teaching people to be good thinkers. Then they can look at the information that's available and make good choices for the long term. I'm curious if Valeria or Michael would like to add.
Yes. Thank you.
I want. Oops.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. After you, Valeria.
Thank you, Michael. I agree with Miroslav that unfortunately we don't have an universal approach, but I think that every step is valuable. In our experience, we choose the easiest way, and we worked with our colleagues, and it was our dream to get in touch with policymakers, because in 2019 we were very young and very small association. But after our campaign, in 2 years ago, we got in touch with our politicians, and they invited us to different events as an opinion leader and as a specialist. So I think that every association should choose the easiest way, and maybe remember that every step is important and valuable. Thank you.
Michael?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I need to just say a few things. First, we need to be patient with us in terms of what we are doing as long as those things are evidence-based. Because the impact on the environment did not start today. Since we have started to reverse our behavior, we need to be patient, to be consistent, and to do what is possible within our various situations. If A contributes, B, C from different situations, we come to the same goal. We also try to convey our communication. For example, if you want to teach children about polythene, say you can put a grain of maize on one part and then put on a soil that is free and natural, and then the children can watch the growth. In that way, they will understand how polythene can pollute the soil. So use of life examples will be very, very practical to convey our message about the environment. Thank you.
So great points. Just in case the sound was a little convoluted, making sure we rely on science and our communications clear and very relevant, practically based. Okay, I just wanted to be sure I wasn't missing one. So if you had the opportunity to teach children or adults about climate, what's the first thing you would want them to learn? In our last 3 minutes, so you each just have a few seconds to answer.
Yeah, my very quick answer, and I know that we haven't enough time, is mindfulness meditation and compassion meditation in each grade at schools. And I think that this could be the reprocessing of information of our children. And I believe that it could help to be able to slow down and be aware what is going on around the world and be in a better contact with our environment. So quick answer, not so quick, but a quick answer is mindfulness meditation. Thank you.
Fascinating. I love it. We'll go Valeria, Michael, and then wrap up with Usha.
Yes, I would like to say, why don't we teach our children so connected with the social media, how the those environment change globally, and some scientific evidence-based research result also we can impart when we are teaching, giving certain examples, bring up the real life examples. What happened after the deforestation or the flood, because here we do have landsliding, many things, because Nepal is much vulnerable to the disaster. That is one of the impact of climate change even. That's why don't we talk about the global solution to the problem? Because what are the global solution to that problem? Because first we show the certain real examples and give them a certain thought how the global solutions to solve those problems, and discuss the personal action and fight climate change, how we did play a role model hanging
Usha,
up
thank you.
Poster also, and create the art relating to the climate change. Give them the chance to make a certain art, because they do have a certain thought. They power on the painting. What are
And in our last minute, so that's about 30 seconds, Valeria, 30 seconds, Michael, what's the first thing you would want to be sure someone learns?
Yeah, for such persons to understand the direct link between human survival and the environment. And so to live is to allow the environment live and live better. Thank you.
Valeria?
It's very easy to be in contact with nature. I think it's very important, but it's very difficult to teach it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much for all the work you're doing, for this intriguing conversation, and We have a 10-minute break. I'll see everyone back here in about 10 minutes when we have the distinct opportunity here from Abdullah Shahid, who's Minister of Foreign Affairs at the Maldives, which is an island that's experiencing significant consequences of climate change, and is also the United Nations General Assembly President, followed by Elena Villalobos-Bratz, who's the capacity building lead for climate change at the World Health Organization. Thank you. See you in 10 minutes.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back. I am truly honored to have the opportunity to introduce you to Abdullah Shahid, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Maldives, as I mentioned before the break, and the President of the United Nations General Assembly. He shared a video recording with us in which he's going to talk about hopeful narratives for climate action. Subsequently, we will have a presentation by Elena Villalobos-Prats, who is a capacity building and country support lead for climate change and health at the World Health Organization. And Elena will speak to us about the health drive at COP26 and beyond, opportunities for action, which is music to our ears, actually, in the Alliance. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you both.
Excellencies, friends, I thank the Global Psychology Association for inviting me to speak. There's a reason I chose hope as the underlying theme of my presidency, one very much tied to addressing the mental health needs of our 8 billion constituents. Ladies and gentlemen, the past 2 years have taken a heavy toll on our collective psyche. COVID-19 has left us a legacy of human tragedy and socio-economic devastation. Faced with new realities of working from home, temporary unemployment, loss of income, homeschooling of children, isolation, bereavement, and fear have triggered mental health conditions or have exacerbated existing ones. The pandemic compounded the existing challenges brought on by rapid urbanization, communal disintegration, and growing disparities in wealth. Meanwhile, our news stories are dominated by headlines of political strife and conflict, social inequality and exclusion, and the existential dangers posed by climate crisis. This feeds our anxieties and leaves us fearful. Excellencies, climate change is creating a generation of climate distress and hopelessness. Extreme weather events have been associated with increases in aggressive behavior and domestic violence. Flooding and prolonged droughts have been associated with elevated levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders. Many potential long-term impacts of climate change, such as population migration, food scarcity, loss of employment, and loss of social support, have consequences for mental health. Everyone is at risk, but not everyone is affected equally. Groups that are especially vulnerable to the mental health impacts of climate change include children, the elderly, and women. Also at risk are disadvantaged groups, those with existing mental illnesses, and those with close ties to the land, including farmers and tribal communities. Today, nearly 1 billion people live with a mental health disorder. Alarmingly, more than 75% of people in low-income countries do not receive treatment for it. These numbers will only get worse if we do not act. My dear friends, we must act to counter the disparity narrative that future will bring only more tragedy and loss. People do not act when they feel hopeless. They act when they are reminded of what is possible, what has been achieved, what can be achieved. This is why I have chosen hope as the theme of the 76th session of the General Assembly. Hopeful narratives can remind us that humanity has overcome numerous challenges before, and that we can still take control of our own destiny. Hope can remind us that it is in our hands to recover better from this pandemic and rescue our planet from climate disaster. Hope can mobilize the grassroots coalitions to take urgent action to create future that we want. We must draw upon and demonstrate our successes, our examples of goodwill and of global cooperation to inspire hope. This in turn will help us heal from the massive mental health crisis affecting our communities and mobilize us to act. Empowered by that hope, we can approach our global environmental challenges with fresh energy, mindful that we do indeed have the capacity to make a difference. And we can give hope to future generations, ensuring that they do not endure the stress and anxiety of being uncertain about the fate of their communities. That was the underlying spirit of the climate event I held on 26th of October in the lead up to COP26. And that drives my every move this year. As a small islander, I vividly feel the threat of rising sea levels to my native Maldives. Yet, I remain hopeful. I must be hopeful. Trust that during my presidency of hope, I will do all that I can to support your efforts to combat the climate crisis through a psychological lens and alleviate its many negative repercussions on mental health. In turn, I hope I can count on your support in mobilizing grassroots, whole of society responses to build the hopeful future we want. I thank you.
Now we will move from this very inspiring message about hope to some practical ways that we can take action, I think, based on that hope with Elena's presentation. Go ahead, Elena.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and thanks everybody for inviting me to be part of this important event. For some reason, oh no. I will just give a brief presentation of how health and the health community has basically been involved in the run-up to COP, and then the opportunities that I think we have in front of us to basically improve the consideration of mental health within overall climate change and health approaches. Basically, this has been a different year for WHO because it's the first time that we had the opportunity to formally collaborate with the president of the COP. This year, the UK, as president of the Conference of the Parties, basically approached us quite early. They were interested in developing a health program, and they were interested in prioritizing health within their presidency. What you are seeing in the screen is basically the campaigns that they included within the COP and how they thought health was basically part of that. So basically, they had a priority campaign on adaptation and resilience, another one on energy transition, clean transport, nature, and finance. And they consider that within those, health should be basically integrated. Under the adaptation and resilience, it's clear that there is an opportunity for building climate resilient health systems, and then also adaptation action in those determinants of health like food, water, and sanitation. Under energy transition, they wanted to ensure a rapid transition to clean renewable energy, basically to save lives from air pollution, reducing the exposure to air pollution, which is mainly due to fossil fuel combustion. Under the clean transport, they wanted to promote sustainable, healthy urban transport systems, including the promotion of those co-benefits that can be gained through healthy transport interventions. And then nature, protect and restore nature and ecosystems, and which are the foundations for healthy lives and sustainable livelihoods. And then under finance, basically make sure that the health system is also able to access climate funding for health. We all came to Glasgow, knowing that this was an important year for the negotiations because basically countries were expected to come to Glasgow with renewed plans to decrease their emissions. So basically they were expected to either submit new or renew their NDCs, which basically are their promises on how they are going to reduce their emissions and basically in which sectors. WHO did a qualitative assessment of these NDCs, and basically out of 142 either new or updated NDCs in 2021, we saw a change compared to the ones that were submitted until 2019, that basically there was a change, incremental consideration of health in the NDCs. So basically out of all the 142 assessed NDCs, health was integrated into 94% of those. There was a decrease in the adaptations, in dimensions to adaptations and resilience compared to the ones that we assessed in 2019. There was an increase in the integration of health co-benefits related to mitigation actions in other sectors, and also an increase in the quantification of those co-benefits in relation to mitigation in those sectors that are more responsible for emissions, like, for example, energy, transport, food. And we all knew that the level of ambition of these NDCs basically is going to determine the future and whether we are able or not to get to this desire of just getting to a maximum of 2 degrees centigrade increase of temperature compared to pre-industrial levels, or ideally 1.5. In the run-up to COP, WHO was working with all the health community. So basically we facilitated, let's say, the development of this report, which was launched also and presented to the COP. And something that is quite significant is the mobilization of all the health community, because what you see there is basically representing by now is over 46 million health professionals or workers. So basically institutions representing all of those professionals signed this report and back up the recommendations that are included there. Basically, it lays out 10 recommendations with regards to climate change and health and how the negotiators could promote and consider those. WHO also, in collaboration with the Global Climate and Health Alliance and other relevant partners like the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the Glasgow Caledonian University, organized the 4th Global Conference on Health and Climate Change. Was organized on November 6, just one day, and then it had a special focus on climate justice and healthy and green recovery from COVID-19. I've participated in the 4th conference, and I think this was really different in the sense that all participants that attended the conference had something to contribute, and it was quite satisfying to look around to participants and see that everybody was really an expert on climate change and health in different topics, co-benefits, mental health, sexual and reproductive health, and climate change. And the level of the discussions and the level of motivation was quite high. And also was very good to see that there were a lot of women leaders able to present in this conference. Also, for the first time, WHO managed to get a pavilion on health, and basically it was made available to all the health community, and there were organized over 70 side events on climate change and health, again from a broad range of topics and with different partners and expertise. And it was amazing because it was always full. At the beginning, at least me, I was a little bit reluctant to have all these side events on climate change and health because In previous COPs, I don't know, 10 years ago, we were organizing maybe 2, 3, then we were increasing the number, but never to this scale. And I was thinking, okay, maybe we don't get enough attention or we don't get enough interest from participants, but it was amazing because it was really always booked. With regards to the COP26 health program and the official initiatives that they launch within the COP, there are key 4 initiatives. One is related to climate resilient health systems. Another one is low carbon sustainable health systems, which is basically looking at the health sector and the role in leading by example. I don't know if you know, well, you know for sure that the NHS UK basically shared their commitment to get to net zero by 2040. And this was the first time that they were reporting on their targets. They set ambitious targets for each year. And basically this year they announced that they are on track to this net zero. And I think they've been doing this for a long time now. And they have, of course, a lot of knowledge and experience to share with other health systems around the world. But we are seeing that this is becoming a priority also for the health sector. It's not only raising the health sector as a climate sensitive sector, which needs to be supported, but also about the opportunity that everybody has to basically use the health argument to motivate others. And in this case, basically take the lead and then take a responsibility, a share of responsibility to reduce the emissions, because as you know, almost between 4.5 and 5% of the global emissions come from the health sector. Another initiative that is very important and that has been supported by the COP is basically healthy and disease. So basically, as I was explaining before, making sure that the national commitments integrate health in all relevant sections of these commitments. So basically, under impacts, under options for adaptation, under the commitments itself to mitigate, and then propose those solutions that maximize the health co-benefits. And then probably the most successful and the most important is the one on mobilizing the health voices for climate action, because they've done a lot in the run-up to COP, and hopefully we will continue to do so, taking just advantage of the momentum that has been created. The outcome of the negotiations, basically we all know that probably the outcome has not been as ambitious as we all want. Basically, negotiators agreed to the Glasgow Climate Pact, where the right to health is mentioned, basically in the preamble, saying as it was mentioned in the Paris Agreement, and also the devastating effects of the COVID-19 have been included. In the closing remarks by Patricia Espinosa, she was basically, which is the head of the UNFCCC, she was basically raising also the fact that they have been listening to more and more interventions related to the need to consider health and the health sector in the response and in the agreements on climate change. Achievements, even if the Glasgow Climate Pact has not been what we need really to move to action and to start tackling the climate change problem, I think it is important to highlight that they've agreed that these NDCs are going to be revised again next year, versus the 5-year period that was established under the Paris Agreement. This is good because current NDCs, if implemented, they will put us in a path to get to an increase of temperature of 2.4 degrees centigrade, which of course is not something that humanity can allow. So it gives us a little bit of hope. I have been hearing this word today a lot. So basically, okay, if we work with countries, if we try to raise the health argument, they may be considering revising again their commitments and to include a little bit more of ambitious. It's the first time that also something related to the limiting coal use has been integrated into the agreement of the COP. It is shocking to realize that this is the first time. So basically, we've been discussing for over 26 years, and this is the first time that this is integrated. There was almost an agreement to include phase down, but then, phase out. But then at the end of the negotiations, there was some resistance, and then it has to be changed by phase down, which again is not the ideal, but at least there is a hope that there is a tendency to eliminate coal. And then something that has been very sticky in the negotiations is basically all the points related to finance, because this is related to the equity point that was raised before also by some of the presenters. As you know, there is a principle integrated into the UNFCCC, which is related to common but differentiated responsibility. So basically it's raising the equity principle because not all countries have the same historical responsibility, and basically should be a little bit more the blend of supporting other countries. So for low and middle income countries and for developing countries, it is important to get the support that they require in terms of both adaptation, mitigation, technology transfer, capacity building. And then it has been agreed that countries will have to fully deliver this 100 billion goal at least by 2025. It was promised that it should be done by 2020. It didn't happen. And then, there have been some shy advancements just to make sure that this is moving. And then also countries raise their concerns about access to finance. So basically they're going to prioritize. With regards to health outcomes, we were very successful because we've been working as WHO with the UK presidency campaign to get countries to commit to mainly to these initiatives on climate resilient and low carbon sustainable health systems. And we basically were able to announce that 52 countries signed by the Minister of Health have basically committed to these initiatives. These initiatives basically include the following commitments that you can see there: conducting a climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessment at population or healthcare facility level, building on this evidence, develop comprehensive health national adaptation plans, use both the vulnerability and adaptation assessments and the plans to facilitate access to climate funding for health. And then under the commitment on low carbon sustainable health systems, basically all countries conduct an assessment of the carbon footprint of their health systems. And once they do this assessment, which basically will allow them to understand where these emissions are coming from, if it is from procurement, transport, energy, waste management, then develop plans to reduce these emissions. And then for those high emitters, basically set a target date by which to achieve the health system net zero emission, ideally maximum by 2050. I think those commitments are important because are going to frame a lot of the country support that we as WHO and probably FCDO and other partners are going to basically provide country level. This slide just summarizes how countries responding to the global survey on climate change and health have been integrating mental health considerations within their VNAs and HNAPs. On the left, you see that out of the 95 countries that responded to this global survey, 48 are saying that they develop climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessment. And 16 additional countries are currently undertaking one. If you just look at low and middle income countries, 22 out of 39 have developed a VNA. And then we, in addition to this global data, basically we did a test review of 43 assessments. And only 8 out of these 43 included mental and psychosocial health. It may seem that it's low, but it's an incremental improvement compared to the previous assessment that we did in 2019. And something that we are seeing more and more is that countries are now getting that this is a priority. Whereas before, the priority was mainly related to vector-borne diseases, diarrheal diseases, undernutrition, and so forth. And now, mental health is really coming as a priority. And when you look to the NAPs, to the plans and the health component of the plans that they are developing, the same. The denominator is 95 countries. So 49 are saying that they are developing or they've developed plans, and then 24 are developing now. 33 have been developed as part of the overall climate change and health process at national level. So basically strengthening the collaboration with the Ministry of Environment or the ministry that is leading climate change. And then out of a test review of 31, 9 include mental and psychosocial health. I see that my time is running. So basically, just to finish saying that WHO is currently developing a policy brief on mental health and climate change. And something that is important to consider is that the work that we are promoting at country level has 3 key areas of work. One is addressing the wide range of health impacts of climate change. Second is strengthening the climate resilient and environmental sustainability of health systems and facilities. And the third one is assessing and promoting the health benefits of climate change mitigation in other sectors. Last slide is basically when we look at mental health and how we can integrate mental health into the overall approach at country level on climate change and health. Probably the most important thing that I can say, and you have basically we have a health systems approach. We have 10 components around the 6 building blocks of health systems that should be implemented to make sure that the health system becomes resilient to climate change. But looking at everything that we are doing now, there is a lot that we have to learn now on the impacts of mental health, of climate change on mental health, because you all know that, I mean, much more than I, you are exposed to that, you hear the feelings or that youth are expressing, no, about solastalgia, eco-anxiety, ecological grief, and also even the positive effects that becoming active in this climate change action can have. Others say that there can also be negative impacts of activism. All this feeling of hope or doing something for the future. Yeah, so sorry if I was a little bit long. That's it from my side.
Elena, thank you so much. And you were perfect on time. I'll just very quickly introduce our panelists. Dr. Luis Carrizo, who represents the Uruguayan Psychological Society of the Global Psychology Alliance. Dr. Sandy Schulman, who represents the American Psychological Association, the Alliance. And Dr. Rashmi Jaipal, who is, Rashmi's here, I just saw her, but she has long had a leadership role in APA's United Nations team, a group of psychologists that represents the APA at the UN in New York. And so with that, I want to start with the first question, trying to sort of combine the two presentations. We started off with the president of the General Assembly at the United Nations speaking about the importance of hope and the human need for hope. I'm curious if you might, and we'll start with Sandy, move to Rashmi, and then Luis, how you might talk about the ways in which psychologists can bring hope to the table as we try and influence the climate crisis, in particular, perhaps from a global perspective, like the one which Elena is working in.
Okay, Amanda, I'll start with such a simple question. I joke. So from my perspective on an individual, group, and systems level, psychology and psychologists are knowledge generators for fostering efficacy, fostering self-empowerment, fostering resilience. And we also bring the knowledge of understanding how motivation and abilities come together to change behavior. We also bring the capacity to understand what goes into increasing community engagement. And we also know on an individual and a systems level, the components of how you generate both health inequities and eliminate them to create health equity. So I think we bring a tremendous number of things to the notion of hope. All of those things to me underpin hope. For me, climate change is human change. And when we make those connections, the fact that we haven't really made those connections yet as a global community, that climate change is a distant concept for many people. If people understand that climate change is human change, then we can begin to apply all of these tools that we have to help people help themselves. And what I would say from a systems level, a global systems level, is that the psychology of hope, from my perspective, given that we're starting to deal with things like rapid urbanization, mass migration, forced migration, those kinds of things that were alluded to by the speakers. The psychology of hope, from my perspective, is about building up community support and integration. It's about increasing social belonging. It's about instilling and supporting accountability and connection between people. And it's about creating settings and environments for coming together to learn, grow, change, and thrive as a global community. These are all things that are deeply embedded in the discipline and the practice of psychology. And I think we have much to bring to the world's hopefulness about it. So I leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Rashmi.
Yes. Hi, Amanda. And it's a real pleasure to be a part of this global psychology conversation with psychologists all over the world. It's really wonderful to hear everyone and to have the aim to mobilize psychology at the global level, I think is really important. So I think what President Shahid was saying about, saying how hope is so important and positive messaging and hope is what inspires action. I was really impressed that that's his agenda at the UN. It's rarely you get something like that at the UN, where he's really tapping into a more psychological dimension, unless he's just saying it for us, I don't know, but it sounds like it's very, very, very insightful. And I think psychology is the perfect discipline to do this, because psychology, there are three ways, I think, in which psychology can bring about, try to instill hope or create hope. One is to do grassroots campaigns, like grassroots social media campaigns with positive messaging. That's, and I'll give an example later. Another one is that, national psych organizations have local, I think many of them have local chapters in different parts of their countries. And if at the national level, they could mobilize the local chapters to do like a coordinated campaign at the local level in terms of positive messaging and bringing about hope. And thirdly, also to engage communities. The local chapters can also engage their local communities, work with local authorities, schools, health facilities, etc. They can, our discipline has a lot of connections and networks with these different local organizations and chapters. So, and what we can do, especially in the last day and today, talking about how we know how to do positive messaging. We know how to do behavioral nudges, and also the positive messaging can be, it's very important to give examples, as President Shahid said, of what has been accomplished, what is happening, positive stories, stories of collaborations, things that have worked, how people are actually doing things, because a lot of times people feel isolated and nobody's doing anything. So we can do that. And I want to give an example of something that it's called the It Takes a Community campaign that was started by GFMD, that's a Global Forum on Migration and Development, started this social media campaign, which has been taken over by civil society to combat racism and discrimination. It includes climate displaced refugees. There's a lot of xenophobia against them also. And what they're doing is they're asking all these grassroots organizations around the world to contribute positive stories of integration of these refugees or positive experiences, not just the negative, but to focus on the positive. So this is an example of what we could do, if we, through social media campaigns, we can spread a lot of, we can give hope in this way by spreading a lot of positive stories that combat the negative emphasis in the media. It's always the negative. So these are some ways, and then, I just want to, there are more, but I can stop there.
Thanks, Rashmi. Luis, and then we'll follow up Elena if she would like to add to this as well.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. It's a very, very high pleasure to be here with you today talking about hope. This is a good day if we talk about hope in such times where uncertainty and challenges knock our doors. If we are talking, I fully support what President Shahid has just said about the importance of hope to strengthen and getting out of inaction. And when we talk about hope, I think immediately in two things. Understanding is one of the tools to build hope, and awareness is another tool to build hope. But if we want to invite communities to stay out of their inaction, first of all, we should ourselves get out of our inaction, and that's the point of my speech here. We should, as psychologists, and we should, as professional associations, we should move on. We should take good awareness of what is happening and what is the role of psychology in complex and global issues such as climate change and mental health. We should, as Rashmi has just said, run grassroots campaigns to inform, to raise awareness in the communities. But first of all, we should raise awareness in our own institutional frameworks. We should raise awareness in our own professional practice. We should raise awareness in our capacity building centers, in our higher education centers, because psychology and climate change is not evident by itself. We should work to get the linkage of climate change, psychology, and mental health clear very clear for everyone. And first of all, we should talk about ourselves. How could we work to get action out of our institutional associations? And I have 2 or 3 ideas in this sense. First of all, we should do what we are doing right now, international cooperation. That's a very important and critical strategy to move on in this sense. We should change. We should shift the mindscape of understanding complex issues. We should work transdisciplinarity to address complex issues. We should dialogue, not only cooperation between our institutions, but cooperation in the knowledge arena and with the communities themselves that knows a lot of what is going on. And that is a shift, a very important and radical shift to understand and to promote the action. And I finish with one line, Amanda, if you let me. When we talk about uncertainty, we should talk about the gift of uncertainty, because as some colleagues say, uncertainty comes with a promise. Things could be otherwise. And uncertainty, the principle of uncertainty is indeed the principle of liberty, and is in our hands that we could build the hope that uncertainty needs. Thank you.
I love those points. With that, could each of the 3 of you briefly touch base on how to get these kinds of ideas like psychology language into sustainable development goals or upcoming UN policy on climate? We'll start with Rashmi, Luis, then Sandy.
Sure. I think that it's very good to have President Shahid as the president now of the General Assembly. He's really wonderful, very praiseworthy where he's coming from and what he's talking about. So this is the time might be ripe right now to do this kind of advocacy on behalf of psychology. And I think that one of the ways to do this is to create at the UN, we should create a group of friends that is member states who are friendly with psychology. We have been talking about this for a while, have a champions of psychology group of member states of the UN that can then lobby all of this, can try to lobby for the language that we supply them, the specific language that we want to get into these agreements, like the next COP agreement, and so on. This is really important if we want to get that done. But also, I would suggest that we need to place the language, this initiative on climate change and psychology under the umbrella of the SDGs, so that because the countries have all signed on to the SDGs, so if we go with that approach also to say, this is one of the standalone goals of the SDGs, the goal number 13. So we can, it behooves us to, and it behooves you to kind of help us put this language into the agreement. And just one other thing is that I think also we need to coordinate what the psychologists do at the UN with this wonderful Global Psychology Alliance network or things like that, so that what we're doing at the international level, like trying to promote language and push for things like that here, if simultaneously at the national level, the national psychology organizations are aware of this and can lobby their governments, because anything that happens that we push for at the international level goes back to headquarters in each country. So the country, it's the most important thing is to lobby the country at the national country level to say, listen, we really think this language and the psychology, the approach of psychology and mental health is so crucial, and it's at the heart of climate resilience and also the heart of sustainable development. So if they lobby their governments, then that will help us get it through at the international level as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Luis?
Yes, thank you, Amanda. You know, your question raises my memories. I remember, in this sense, the contributions that a very highlighted scholar from Harvard Education School, Dr. Carol Weiss, worked so much from the 70s last century to foster the linkage, the dialogue between knowledge and policy, between scientific knowledge and public policy. And she, during 40 years, 50 years, worked very hard to enlighten our understanding to the challenges of how a professional, how an academic, a scholar, a scientific could address policymakers and in an understandable way, in a timely way, with a clear focus on what to say and when to say to advocacy for some issue, evidence-based in scientific knowledge. So here is a challenge for us. Here is a challenge for our associations, for our professionals to develop some capacities, specific skills to get in touch with policymakers, to get in touch with those decision makers that won't have the enormous time to read a 40 pages report. No, we should develop these specific skills if we want that our professional, our scientific knowledge plays a role or orienting public policy in the way that will be better. That's why it is very hard to make a good advocacy in the public policy framework. We should raise these skills. That's what I guess.
Thank you. Sandy?
Yes. First of all, I want to acknowledge Rashmi and Louise's points are exceptionally well taken. So I need not repeat them. They were terrific. I think they really got to the heart of the matter globally. I want to bring it back finally to us and the purpose of this conference and this group to talk about how we engage in policy on the global stage. So for us as a global psychology community, I think we need to build a strong foundation of both what we do and how we do things differently to get to that stage of global impact. First and foremost, I think we need a framework that really allows for shared goals in global psychology with unique pathways to get there that recognize the contextual and cultural factors. And in other words, we need to work a lot like COP26 and other similar meetings have worked. And that's how we have developed. If I learned nothing last year as APA president in 2020 from a global perspective, is what a wonderful capacity building experience we had building the Global Psychology Alliance. And that alliance can now take itself to a different level with a common framework. And I believe people, well, like what Amanda talked about in the beginning about a framework yesterday, what Brian Dixon talked about in terms of building community engagement, what Susan Clayton laid out as the psychological framework for intervention could be the bases of framework for us to allow for unique pathways, but to have a framework that's common for all of us. Secondly, I think how we work, not just what we do, but how we work is really important. The fact that this alliance really understands the need for unity for major concerns globally, major challenges globally, that while appreciating the uniqueness of communities like the Ukraine and our Ukrainian colleagues and all that they have done, that we can come together across differences and we can model the way. And last but not least, I think for both the Global Leadership Alliance and the Global Learning Leadership Institute that we have established, we have, I think, highlighted the importance of leadership in bringing together both a framework we need and a way of working. I've spent the last part of my career writing about leaders, psychologists as learning leaders. I believe now is our time as a global community, taking this up a level. So not only are we engaging with the UN and the World Health Organization as individual nations working somewhat collaboratively, but that we work as a Global Psychology Alliance and a Global Learning Leadership Institute together to bring things up and representing 70 nations, not just one nation. And I think that's something that will give us a lot of power in the policy level. So in closing, what I would say is that we must, as a Global Psychology Alliance, as a Global Learning Leadership Institute, we must be good partners. We must be good actors on the global stage. We must be good leaders, and that the growth of the GPA and the Learning Leadership Institute really makes me hopeful about what will come in the future. Because after all, from my perspective, effective leadership is about focusing and harnessing hope for the common good. And I believe that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. It does seem like an inspiring and hopeful future. We are honored to have APA President, Dr. Jennifer Kelly, here to offer closing remarks. Jennifer, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And greetings, everyone. I would like to thank the Global Psychology Alliance for hosting this event, the esteemed speakers and panelists, and the audience members that are tuning in from all over the world. COP26 was a vital conference, bringing together tens of thousands of representatives from governments and civil society from every corner of the globe. We've learned about the progress that was made in Glasgow. However, we've also heard that the human factors that contribute to climate change and exacerbate its impacts were given scant attention. Over the past several days, we've learned a lot about the ways that psychological science and practice can contribute to combating climate change and its harms. I'm not going to provide an exhaustive list of the topics covered, but we've heard that 1, we can educate and communicate with the public and our colleagues about climate change. 2, we can help organizations enact climate-friendly policies, like reducing their energy use. 3, we can prevent and treat mental health problems stemming from climate-related disorders. And 4, we can advocate for grassroots and global policy to combat climate change. To build on these vital topics, I'd like to close this conference by talking about climate justice and health equity. Many of you may know by now that my presidential initiative, my primary presidential initiative as APA president this year, has been on how psychology can promote health equity. And all of you likely know by now that climate injustice contributes to health inequities. The most vulnerable in society, owing to poverty, geography, gender, age, ethnicity, or disability, they are hit the hardest by climate change. And it's notable that they have typically contributed the least to the problem. Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland and United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, has pointed out that a human-centered approach to climate change must safeguard the rights of the most vulnerable people and share the burdens equitably and fairly. But as of right now, climate change is exacerbating existing inequities and worsening the vulnerabilities of already marginalized populations and communities. Drought, flooding, food insecurity, wildfires, storms, and degraded air quality are happening today, primarily harming the health of marginalized communities. To provide a few examples in the United States, let me do so. People of color and low-income people suffer more during heat waves, breathe dirtier air, and are more likely to suffer flooding. All of these experiences have negative physical and mental health impacts. African Americans have a 5.3 higher percentage of heat-related mortality than whites, much of which can be traced to disparities in home air conditioning. This will just get worse as the world gets hotter. The National Academy of Sciences found that air pollution contributes to more than 100,000 deaths a year. Those deaths are unequally distributed. Black Americans are 79% more likely than whites to live in areas where industrial pollution poses the greatest health dangers, such as living close to oil refineries and coal plants. As a result, people of color breathe 38% more polluted air than whites. It's not a coincidence that Black American asthma rates are 40% higher than non-Hispanic whites, while Black American children are 5 times more likely to be admitted to the hospital for asthma as compared to non-Hispanic white children. Increasing pollution and decreasing air quality will exacerbate these disparities. My presidential initiative has emphasized how psychology can address health disparities through research, policy, public awareness, education, and practice. And this work can be extended into the climate domain. For example, we can, number one, support longitudinal multidisciplinary research programs capable of examining the interrelationships between warming temperatures and health disparities at the individual, family, community, and national levels. 2, partner with community-based organizations, schools, and other professional organizations to plan strategic collaborative efforts to disseminate information on psychosocial support for climate-related distress. 3, advocate for access to mental health services for marginalized communities, made especially necessary due to climate change. And 4, improve the capacity of psychology training programs to train clinicians to discuss and address the effects of climate-related inequality and injustice on individual and community health. Psychology must take an active leadership role in combating climate change, and especially its disproportionate impact on marginalized peoples and communities. Thank you once again to everyone who participated in this global conference. I hope and trust that it will be an important step to leveraging our science and profession to address the great challenge of our era, one of the greatest challenges. Thank you so much.
Jennifer, thank you. That was a brilliant closing to really, thanks to all of you, an extraordinary 2 days. My gratitude to all of you, psychologists, professionals, supporters who've been here as part of this and who will continue to join with us as we work hard to address the climate crisis. Again, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you all. Be well, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.
Thank you.